Hi, my name is Cindy Rang with the Fabric Patch in Ephrata, Washington. You can find us at fabricpatch.net. And today I'm going to show you the 2-bits quilt. This is one of my most favorite quilts. I make this quilt all the time. The thing that I want to mention about it though is it isn't so much a pattern as it's a technique. We do have a pattern available. You can order it from us, or it is available with a download, or we do have some kits of this exact same quilt, and it does include the pattern and all of the binding and all of the fabric. This particular one was done using 2 of the Mochi Chill linen panels, both of them, and 5 1/3 yard cuts of coordinating fabric to be able to end up with a quilt that is, I believe, 60 by 70 inches. What we're going to do is we're going to go to the back and we're going to talk about the technique and how you can make this quilt very personalized, very unique, using all kinds of leftover blocks, focus fabrics, and panels. My daughter and I have owned and operated a busy quilt shop in Washington State for over 20 years. We have a retreat center, an active YouTube channel, and a large pattern line featuring our creations. My 2 sons work on machines. One daughter-in-law is our videographer, and the other is a long-arm quilter. We are a family that love each other, we laugh together, and every once in a while we get some work done. We have a crew that are saints for their efforts at keeping us on track. Thanks for joining us on our wild ride. Okay, so we're in the back room of the shop, and I am going to show you why you want to know how to make the 2-bits quilt. And then when we're done here, I'm going to go out to my sewing studio and I'm going to find some orphan blocks, and we're going to go through every single step by step of exactly how to do this. So if you get lost at some point, just stick with us and we'll be okay. Because again, if you have purchased the kit from us, or if you purchase these 2 panels, you just need 5 1/3 yard cuts. And the pattern that I wrote is very, very specific of exactly what you'll do with these 2 panels or the kit. And I do have all of the instructions of how I did it. But again, the whole idea with this pattern is that, again, it's more of a technique. It's something that once you understand the very simple math involved, you will do this again and again and again. So first of all, with this one, these panels, what's unique about these panels is that all of the blocks are a different size. So you've got some 10.5 inch blocks, you've got some 12.5, 14 by 14. There's even like I think there's a 20.5 by 14.5. And so if you look at how they're all put on the quilt, they're all arranged sort of aesthetically, where I have the blacks opposite of each other. I have some big ones up in the corner, another big one in the middle. And I was able to go ahead and design those where I wanted them and add my little bits in between the panels. And so that's why it's important for you to know how to do this yourself, because you're going to come across other panels or blocks or things that you want to do. Another example is this panel. I love this panel, and it's called Animal Kingdom. And it's like that. It has all kinds of really cool pictures, and they're all very different sizes. And so what will happen is you have to decide how you want to use this, and if you're going to cut it up. If you're using one of the other patterns like crackers or stars and stripes or even Stash Buster, you're going to have to get those panels all to a uniform size to be able to use them. What's really nice about 2-bits, again, is that you're going to have your panels whatever size you want, and you fill in the background. Another way, before we get into how we're going to do it, another thing that you can do is you can find, maybe there's a fabric that you've picked out that you just love. Maybe the fabric is very specific for the person that you're making the quilt for, and you really want to feature the fabric. And so you can cut all of the fabric into the same universal size and choose a favorite pattern for that. But sometimes what's interesting is to have different sized blocks. some 10-inch blocks, some 12-inch blocks, even maybe some 18-inch blocks so that you can show off bits of the fabric. The other thing that you can do is orphan blocks, things where you've made some blocks, put some things together, and then you lost interest in the quilt and you think you're not going to finish it. I feel pretty certain that when I go out and rifle through my sewing studio to use up some stuff, I have an idea of which one I'm going to pick, and that's what I'm going to do with mine. Another way that I have made a lot of 2-bits quilts is if I'm making a graduation quilt for somebody. It's nice to personalize that with the colors that they want, and also to put in, this in fact is a t-shirt block. All you have to do with your t-shirt is just add a little bit of fusible interfacing to it and then cut it up. You can cut it whatever size you want. You can add that, maybe a photo block, maybe a couple of pieced blocks, and you can have a quilt that might have 4 or 5 specific personalized blocks, and then lots of fun little color. So before we go out and go through all of the steps, I want to show you how to essentially write your own pattern and show you how the math works. And whenever I start to talk about math, people get a little bit nervous thinking that that's what makes the quilt hard, but it's not. It really is something very simple, because what's happening is everything is divisible by 2 inches. 2 bits is, my dad used to say 2 bits all the time, and he was always talking about a quarter. So a 2 bits is a 2.5-inch square. And once you sew that 2.5-inch square and you've sewed it all the way around, it ends up 2-inch finished, right? Because your math is important in your quilting, and so you've got 1/4-inch seam allowances all the way around that block. So everything that we're doing is 2.5 inches. And all of our blocks, they just have to be divisible by 2. So our blocks need to be 10.5 by 10.5, or 10.5 by 14.5, or 14 by 16, whatever. It doesn't really matter. You have to add that little 1/2 inch, because once that block is sewn, it's going to be 14 by 16 or 12 by 12. You have to add that seam allowance in there, but all you have to do is just make sure that all of those blocks that you cut, whether it's these blocks, personalized blocks, fabric, a focus fabric, whatever it is, it just has to be divisible by 2, add a 1/2 inch. And all of your little bits that you're putting in are 2.5 inches. Whether you're going to do that in strips, like I'm going to kind of show you, or add little bits as you go. So when you're ready to design your own pattern, you can do it a couple different ways. You can actually get a piece of graph paper and a pencil and sit down and kind of draw it out. It helps you decide exactly the size that you want the quilt, because take your little graph paper and just count out, knowing that each one of those pieces on the graph is, I don't know, can you see up here? So let's just imagine for a second that this is our graph paper. And when we go out to my sewing studio, I have the same creative grid, flannel grid that I use. And this is a 2-inch finished block. So imagine if this were your graph paper, and I know that I want my finished quilt to be 60 by 70, I'm going to count across 30 squares by 35 squares. Put a big border around it, or a line around that on my graph paper, and I'll know that that's the size that I'm working on. And then I can decide if I want a block here, I want another one here, a big one down here, and it helps me to decide what I need. So I can use graph paper, I can use a write-on wipe-off board, or for just a second, I just want to show you a program that I use all the time. So I use an iPad and an iPencil, but whatever your system is, it's fine. This is the app that you're looking for, is an app called Notability. It's not free, but I think it's only like $9, and I absolutely love it. When you download it, when you click on it, you can come over here to select a new project. And then once you have your new project, you can come up here, see the little dots up here, click on that, and click on your options, click on paper, and you can have all kinds of a real cool colored background, but I come over here to the graph. You have a large graph, small graph, medium graph, whatever you want. I'm going to go ahead and pick that one. And then now I have my squares. I know that these are going to be my 2-inch squares, and again, I can count over and decide how big I want my quilt to be, and this is my surface that I'm using. So my pen, I can come up here and decide if I want to do text in there or use a pencil, use a highlighter, use an eraser. I'm going to use a pencil, and even with my pencil, I can decide what size thickness I'm going to use and what color of ink I'm going to use. And then once I've done that, then it's time for me to go ahead and draw my squares. So let's say that I've cut out one of my blocks, and I know that one of my blocks is 10 by 10. And so I've cut it out 10.5 by 10.5. So I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? 5 times 2 is 10. So I'm going to draw my line. And what's nice about this is if you can't draw a straight line, hold it and it straightens the line for you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Hold it, straightens the line for you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Straightens the line and straightens the line. So I've decided that I have this 10-inch block. 10.5, I'm cutting it. It's going to finish 10 inches, and I'm going to put it here. Maybe now I have another one. So I'm going to come up here and click on this, and I'm going to draw around that square, and see it's making this funny little movement. And I'm going to go ahead and I could move the block if I've decided I wanted it here, or I can copy it, long touch, and paste it. And once I've pasted another 10-inch square, I can move that to where I wanted that one, even nudging it over a little bit more until I have it right where I want. Maybe I have a third 10-inch block. Same thing, I'm going to copy, paste it there, move it to where I want it. Line it up on the lines. Okay. And then you can just keep going. Maybe you have another one that is only going to be a little 4-inch block. So again, I'm going to hold it. Hold it. Ooh, I can't draw a straight line. Doesn't even recognize that as a straight line. And maybe that's exactly where I want that one. So this is how you can kind of design it, and then you can even go to text and call the blocks what you want. This one maybe is the, is the cheetah. Maybe this one over here is, is the lion block. So you can go ahead and label all of those blocks, whatever you'd like, and then once you're ready and you feel like you have those the way that you want it, that's when we're going to go ahead and fill in all of these other blocks. And so that's why what we're going to do next is we're going to go out to my sewing studio. I'm going to spend way too much time overthinking exactly what blocks I want to turn into something else, and I'm going to take you through the step-by-step process of exactly how to create your own personalized 2-bits quilt. So these are some blocks from a quilt that I've been making for quite a while, and I'm not entirely sure I'm going to finish it. The quilt is called Gossip in the Garden, and it is a really beautiful quilt, but there's a lot of handwork to it. So this was all hand appliqued, and then I did some hand embroidery on it, some hand embroidery here, and then I have a lot of other little pieces left that are the template pieces. So eventually I'll finish all of these blocks, but maybe what I'll end up doing, instead of having a great big quilt, maybe I can do a couple of small wall hangings, and that will help me to get a project completed and really be able to enjoy it. So these are some of the blocks from the quilt, but if you look at this, you can see that maybe this would not work, right? So this block is 14.5 inches square. 14 inches is divisible by 2. We know that there would be 7 blocks on this side, 7 blocks on the top, right? This one is 4.5 inches by 8.5 inches. Perfect, easily divisible by 2. This one is 4.5 by 24.5. Also perfect. This one This is a 9.5-inch block. There's no way to make that work because obviously it's not divisible by 2, and this is a churn dash block, so it's not like you're able to trim this one down. If I were to trim this down to an 8.5-inch square, I would lose my points, and you don't really want to do that. So this block is a little bit of a reject. But what I do have is I have this one. And so this one happens to be an 8.5 by 8.5 inch block. So I'm going to use that one. And now all I need to do is I can kind of decide if I wanted to make this bigger, I really could add something different. I could spread it apart a little bit more and kind of decide my design. Well, this is that design grid. These are actually 2-inch squares. It's flannel, so I can put everything up. So I could position my blocks a little bit, add some other things to get it to a baby size quilt or a lap quilt. But again, for me, I just want to make this a wall hanging. So now that I've decided kind of the size that I want, my next step would be to pick some fabrics that I want to use. This one is a little bit tricky because these are relatively light fabrics, also again kind of low volume fabrics. So I want to make sure that these blocks are shown off a little bit. So I don't want a whole lot going on in here because I want these blocks to be the focus. So these were the fabrics. These are the 2 bins that I was using while I was making this quilt. And these are the fabrics that I was using. So they're certainly not bright fabrics anyway. They're beautiful Lynette Anderson fabrics. But what I'm going to do is I chose these. And these are just very subtle, kind of nice. I think that these would be nice little squares in there. So these are the ones I picked. You really do not need very much fabric at all. In fact, I'm probably just going to go ahead and cut off 1 strip off of each of these to start with. And I think that that'll be plenty because all I really need is a 2.5-inch square in between all of these. And I think in order to make it look like it was planned, I'm going to go all the way around them. So I'll kind of show you that. What we'll probably do, so it's not really painstaking, is I'm just going to cut it, sew it, put it up, and we'll kind of fast forward through all of it. So you'll just sort of see the process and you'll be able to see it at the end. I did pick out one that I think I would use as a border. And I just think that I would use this one because I've used it as an internal border on that one. And I want to mention this is something you could easily do. If you want to do this process with something and you want to use every block, but maybe you have a bunch of weird blocks that are, where did that one go? That is a 9-inch, well, I just had it. The one that was a 9.5-inch square, just put some borders on those. Get all of those blocks up to something that is divisible by 2 inches, and then you'd be fine. So you could add a border to this one, add a border to this one, add borders to all of them as long as you ended up with something that was an even number. Don't forget to add that 1/2 inch. So when you trim them, 10.5 by 14.5, 14.5 by 14.5, whatever it is. So anyway, I'm going to set these aside and start cutting. Okay, so I've cut these into 2.5-inch strips, and one other thing, if I didn't mention this before with accurate cutting, is that if you're having issues, make sure you have a nice sharp blade. That'll help things. And also make sure that you measure using your ruler because it gives you far more accurate than using the lines on your mat. So anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and sew these into strip sets. And so I'm going to go ahead and sew all 6 together, and I'll show you why after I get that done. I'm going to sew them all, and then I'm going to press, and then I'll be back. Okay, so I have my strips sewn together, and you can see some of them were long strips, some of them were not. That still works out great because then I have options where I have 5 across or 4 across or 2 across, so it works out great. I want to take just a second to talk about pressing. So a couple of things, and again, as with anything, these are just the rules according to me. Doesn't necessarily mean anything, it's just that for me, I get consistently good results by doing just a couple of things. One thing is I tend not to use water or steam in my iron, and the whole reason for that for me is just because I don't like the water to be cooking in my iron all day. We have hard water here, and so we end up with issues with that. That is the only reason that I don't use steam. So if somebody tells you to use steam, or you use steam and you get good results, you can keep doing that. I tend to like best press instead, and that just works better for me. The other thing is people talk about pressing and they do the back of it first. You want to be kind of careful about just pressing the back, because you want to make sure when you have your seam, you want it to open up flat. You don't want to open it up with a little bit of it kind of still resting in there, because if it is, then what will happen is instead of being that 4.5 inches wide, it might be 4.25, because the rest of the fabric is hidden there in that seam. If you don't know what I mean by that, the first time you see it, you'll go, oh, that's what she meant. You want to make sure that those seams are pressed open, because again, the success of this quilt is based on accurate cutting, accurate piecing, and accurate pressing. If you do those 3 things, it'll turn out just right. So for me, the way that I tend to press is I just press my seams open from this side. So I just use a little bit of best press, and what I do is I just rock. I like a heavy iron, and the brand doesn't matter if it's a Rowenta or a Shark. There's a lot of good ones out there, but I just really like a heavy iron, because then what's happening is the iron then does all the work. It's the same reason that I like a heavy rotary cutter, because I don't have to use a whole lot of muscle for it to do what it's supposed to do. So that seam is open. I'm going to do the next one, and again, the only reason I'm lifting it up is because then from the back I can see that my seam is towards me, and I've got it right where it needs to be, and I'm using the edge of the iron to press that open. And I'm not pulling on anything. I'm pressing it open, I'm not ironing it. So I'm not ironing it like I would a shirt. I'm just making sure that that seam is nice and flat. So do the next one, and as I hit this edge, you know, you can kind of feel it. You can feel the edge of that seam, and you can tell that you are pressing that open. And if you have to stop and add a little more best press to it, or again, if you prefer steam, then you can do that. The other thing with steam is that even if you do like steam, you shouldn't use steam if you're using paper. So if you're doing freezer paper or paper piecing or whatever, so because it'll cause problems with your paper. All right, so I've got this part of it pressed. And I kind of like pressing. Pressing is sort of one of those fussy little things that I kind of like to do. So anyway, so this is nice and perfectly flat. I'll kind of hold that up a little bit so you can see that. And then on the other side, you can see all of my seams are going one way. To start with, that's what we're going to do, and I'll show you that. And I always tend to press my seams to the side. It makes your seam just a little bit more sturdy, because what will happen is all of that has folded over. If you press them open like this, then this is considered a dress seam or a flat seam. What will happen is the only thing between the outside world and your batting are the threads that are in that seam. So a child on one end and another child on the other end, you could end up with some you know, some problems. And so that's why we quilters like to press their seams over rather than open. There are some variations to that with different patterns, but as a general rule, you want to press them open. Okay, I've got this one pressed. I'm just going to press this center, and then we'll do some cutting, and I'll show you how this goes together. Okay, so this is pressed. And again, since I used some leftover pieces, it's kind of an odd length, but it works out perfect because now I'm going to cut it into sections. So you can measure this. And again, your seam allowance is important. So if you didn't do a little test ahead of time to measure your 1/4 inch, just kind of check it, because I would know that then these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 across, this should measure 10.5 inches, right? It measures exactly 10.5 inches. These 4 should measure 8.5 inches and 8.5 inches. And of course, those 2 would be 4.5 inches. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to start by cutting these into lengths. So I'm going to cut off my end. And in fact, even this piece I'm going to cut into a... So I'm going to have all of these weird little pieces. So here's 2 of them. I'm going to turn this one around, and I'm going to cut this all up and stack it all up, and then we'll talk in a second. Now there's a rule. What sometimes happens is, just because of the shifting with the fabric, what will happen is every once in a while you have to kind of straighten it up again. And the rule tends to be that it's just about the width of the ruler that you're using. And so that's what happened here, is that it got just a smidge crooked. And it's just the weirdest little thing, but you'll see it as you're cutting, that just this much of it, it's just off. This much at one end and that much at the other end. And it's just, you know, what you want to remember is that fabric is fluid, right? Fabric is, it's not a stiff, rigid thing. And so sometimes it kind of does its own thing. I'm going to have way more pieces than what I need, but that's okay. And the other thing is that if you have a shape cut that has the little 1/2 inch marks, that's a really fast way to cut these up. I do have one, but And the rotary cutter that I like to use is the Quilter Select. You've seen it on probably just about every video that I've done. The reason that I like it is that it's heavy. It's all metal. So again, just like a heavy iron, it does all of the work for you. And it is a true right or left-handed. You can flip it over either way and use it either way. And what I'm doing is, when I hit this button, I open it, and then to close it, you just tap it and it locks it. So that's that little movement that I constantly do. I learned a long time ago to never put my rotary cutter down until it's closed. And the reason for that is all of the scars that I have on my hand is not from me cutting myself. It's from me touching something and bumping into a rotary cutter that was left open. So And I have this a scar on the top of my foot from one that fell off a table and landed right on my foot. So anyway, I always close it before I set it down. And then I just have like one little one here, and just in case I need some ones. I'm gonna, oh, did I get two? I didn't. This is off by probably a 1/16 of an inch, but you don't want to chance it. Okay, so now what I have is I have just kind of some stacks of different ones. So I'm just going to go ahead and count, and I'll decide where they want to be. I'll kind of position them, and then I have to sew them all together. And it's sort of like a puzzle, you know, so what I'll probably do is I'll sew the two in between here to sew that one together, sew this one together, put one down here, sew that one together, and then go all the way around. And again, if you're doing something that's a lot bigger, what you might find is that maybe you're doing 2 rows to sew those together, 3 rows before you sew that together. So it's not going to matter. It's still just that idea of modifying this so that it works for the fabrics you've chosen and the blocks that you've chosen. It's really the idea of understanding the process so you can make this as many times as you want out of whatever fabric you'd like. All right, so for me, I know that this is 8.5, so I need 4 blocks. So I happen to have one of these that is 4 blocks. Here it is. So this will go here, this one will go here. And then, so I've got 1, 2, this was 4.5. So 1, 2, 3, and this was 8.5 and 4, right? So 2, 4, 6, 8. So there's 4 there, 1 there, and 2 there. So I need 7. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'm going to sew these 2 together. Put those there. And then this gives you a second just to kind of look at it and see if you like the colors the way they are, if you like those dark ones in there. And then this one, this I think was 24.5, so I need 12. So I need 2 6s, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 10, so there's 12. I know I'm going to need 12 over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And if you get down to where you kind of have slim pickings, all you really have to do is tear one apart. Give it a little press. No one even knows that it belonged to something else. Oh. Not sure if I like that. Okay. I can even be prepared across the top. I know that this one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Oops. So I need 11 across the top. It doesn't always look right at first, but it's because the math is right It's going to shrink in as we do the seam allowance. Okay, now I'm going to do the one on the outside edge. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, maybe 14. And then across the bottom is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, so now I'm going to sew this to this, sew those together, put that on top of there, sew that one on, sew those together, put that one on, sew that one on, sew those together, and I'm just going to kind of build out like a puzzle. Okay, so sometimes when you're taking it from the board to the sewing machine and you sew it, it gets a little out of order. I didn't intentionally put two green ones together. So you have to decide if you're going to rip that all out and fix that or leave it. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to leave it because that kind of thing doesn't really bother me. I think that I like the idea that it's sort of unexpected and it's not going to bother me that those two are touching. But what I am going to do is I'm going to go ahead and finish this up. So I'm going to sew all of these together, sew that on the bottom, sew those together, sew that on the top, take a little look at it, and then I'm going to put one more border around it, and then I'll show you when I'm done. You can hopefully see how this can easily be modified, again, to where maybe you were putting 2 rows together. One thing that I didn't talk about was nestling seams. So if you had something where you had maybe 4 squares that were going together, I always press my seams in one direction, but there might come a time where what's going to happen as you sew them together, you have to nestle those little seams to make sure that all of your points come out just right. And that's just sort of a typical lesson. It's something that we've talked about in previous videos, but that's something that you'll want to just sort of watch. Since this is just a small wall hanging, I don't have a lot of extra borders in there, or extra pieces in there. It's just the one single strip. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get this finished, and then I'll show you when I'm done.
Thank you for watching our video. We invite you to leave a comment, hit the like button, or better yet, subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode. You can also visit our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or Pinterest pages, or find all of those things and our online store at fabricpatch.net.